in the supermarket, some guy, he cussed me out in front of my daughter. I don't even know him. The people that have retweeted my account are associated with shootings in Washington. They're associated with alt-right accounts that are associated with insurrectionists and people who show up, at people's houses. Remember with the nurses, everyone was like, yay, nurses. And then now nobody cares, right? They're still struggling. People are dying. They're overworked. We don't care anymore. Just get back to normal, right? And similar happened with schooling. In the beginning, everyone was like, yay, teachers, we're cool, staying home. And then after the summer, there was a lot of parents were like, okay, I can't handle this anymore. I need my kids to go back. The Republican Party basically decided to rebrand itself as the party of parents, and they were going to use this kind of parent frustration and energy. And even Trump said he wanted to be the party of suburban moms, white moms.
Allie, thanks for coming on to the show. You are the founder of Allie M Productions. Your work on the San Francisco School Board advanced opportunities for Black, Indigenous, and Asian students. And you're the host of Just Talks, a podcast for politically aware parents, educators, and activists fighting for educational justice in public schools. I am super, super excited to have you on the show because almost a year ago, I talked about you on my live stream during my discussion about racism and in San Francisco public schools. And I'm so glad that I covered that topic because now you're here today to share your story and to talk about how you see life, your analysis of what's happening right now in public education with CRT and school boards, and also even your prediction for what we can expect if shit doesn't change. But before we get into the center of this discussion, I want to give folks a better opportunity to understand your journey and what you've gone through to get to this point. And I think the best place to start would actually be your education. Specifically, I want to know what kind of student were you from K through 12? And how do you compare that with the education that you were given at home by your parents?
That's a really interesting question because and nobody's ever asked me that. And it's funny in a way. I think we do things because we're, as adults, we want to kind of recreate and repair harm for ourselves, but also for future generations. And I had a really interesting experience in school. And I think a lot of the work that I do is driven by that. When I first went to school, my parents put me in an elementary school, and I think after a month of being there, I was advanced in reading. I liked reading, and I remember having to ask for more and more reading books so I could keep kind of moving up. And I remember that my parents came in for parent conference, and the teacher said, she's doing really great considering she doesn't speak English. And my parents were like, what? And I remember them looking at each other, and my dad's Black and my mom's white, and I was in a mostly Latinx school. And I realized, I think I look back and I realize, that like, they were like, this teacher doesn't even know who my kid is. I was really shy, so I didn't speak a lot. And I guess she just thought I was a really avid reader, despite the fact that I was an English learner. And so they ended up moving me to another school, which was, I guess, considered one of the more higher performing schools. And I did really well there academically, but then I didn't fit in because it was mostly Asian and Latinx, and mostly Asian and white. And so being mixed race, I remember my parents kept asking me, like, are you having any trouble? Because it was still this, it was like this late 70s and, early 80s, and saying, are you having any problems with race? And I kept saying no, and yet I was being excluded from different things, or maybe just overlooked because I was racially ambiguous. I didn't count as Black, but I definitely wasn't Japanese American or Chinese American. And so I ended up learning a lot about inter-Asian kind of down in LA. A lot of the students that I went to school with were very much into their second generation or third generation, and very much into their Japanese American heritage. I also remember there was kind of inter-Asian racism or kind of bias around like which Asian nationalities were better. which is something, as a kid, just weird to grow up with. And so I grew up with a very, I guess, nuanced understanding of what race was. And at the same time, also didn't identify openly as Black until I went to the East Coast and then really experienced anti-Black racism, like flat out. And so, like, a lot of those things, I was also identified as gifted and then went to a gifted program that was just awful. It was really boring. And then I had friends who felt left out and felt like, what's wrong with me? And I felt guilty going. And so all of those experiences have kind of informed, my experience as an educator and watching how things are stratified or structured for kids, some kids to have access and some kids to not have access, and how to what's a social experience like for students, who feels welcome, who feels visible, who feels valued, and how that can change also depending on the context that you're in. So yeah, I think it's interesting, how our life experience informs our work. I think part of the reason why I wanted to teach in SF Unified is because it did, when I moved here, it's very different now, but when I moved here, it was a lot more diverse ethnically and culturally and racially and even economically. And I think it felt normal for me because of my life growing up in LA, in Silver Lake. Now Silver Lake has been gentrified, but there was economic integration, which is really, and it was also, pro LGBTQ, like I had gay neighbors, and, as a kid, it was normalized. So in San Francisco, to be in a place where just all of that was normal, and like 25% of the population was Latinx, 12% was Black. It is not that anymore. But as a teacher, I felt kind of like I was teaching in schools that I grew up with a lot of those dynamics. And so I felt like, I guess, I had an opportunity to make a difference and give back and have a impact on systems change and actually changing the system. And I'll say I did have overall a good experience, but there were times when, I didn't like English really, or history, because we only read white male authors from England. I think things are different now. So it was fun as a teacher being able to read a lot of diverse texts and to, celebrate gay pride and things that, when I was a kid, we didn't do. Even in I think LA, where I was from, is very diverse, and we thought ourselves as very progressive. It's tough. You look forward and you see, I think San Francisco's a lot harder to live in economically. It's been, communities of color have been pushed out, and at the same time, there's, policies in place, like that, like Black Lives Matter in schools, like
Hmm.
Black
Hmm.
students matter, those kinds of things we didn't say, and we didn't really have those kind of campaigns. So, but anyway, it's I'm just I'm just committed to education, and I think it's because of that experience, and I think it's a legacy too. I also want to say my dad and mom were first generation college students, and so it's almost like a family, I don't know, it's a family tradition, for me, even though they weren't educators, talking about education and investing in public education as a means for improving democratic society, but also self-determination and
Hmm.
self-actualization through learning.
Wow. And I'm glad you mentioned your parents and your dad, because I remember you mentioning how your father received a quality education
Mhm.
and how that had an impact on the education that you received. And so the story about the importance of education rippling through time and through generations is such an important reminder that we should invest in quality early education for
Mhm.
communities of all colors, of all genders, and economic backgrounds. And for years, you've been working in the public education system, taking on roles big and small, which has given you a very unique perspective on both the small day-to-day experiences of being an educator, all the way to more high level decision making as commissioner. So
Mhm.
when you look at all the different hats you've worn, what roles do you think stand out the most? Like, obviously, there were lessons learned from each job, but I'd love to know what key positions throughout your work really opened your eyes the most and really kind of turn on that light bulb.
Right. Well, it's funny, right? If you want to understand something, we all sit in a different space and we have a viewpoint from that space. And I have been fortunate enough to be in a lot of different spaces. Um, I started out because I had a degree in acting. I wanted to use that for good, and I figured, okay, well, I can. I found a program where I could actually work with students on social issues and then train them to do presentations for their peers on topics that they are interested in. So that's considered youth development, where you really you don't come in with an agenda. You say what are you interested in, and then the kids say, well, we want to talk about this issue in our school. It's a problem, and then you help get them educated, and then but you're really facilitating their their learning and their ability to kind of create change. And I felt really grateful to start as an educator in that role. And that eventually led me to be an English teacher because I didn't have a credential and I needed a degree, and so in a credential. So English was the closest thing to theater. But then I realized I can do this in when we read novels. Like, this is because writing and reading and communicating, advocating for yourself with words is how you fight and how you define yourself. And so I kind of took a lot of the youth development work that I had done and just kind of used literature and writing and presentation, which is verbal language, right? And debate, right? I was a debate coach. So, because education for me is a tool for self-actualization and for students, especially at the high school level, for them to really see like who they can create, how they can inhabit who they want to be, how they can create that person, because they're still becoming who they are through their education. I think when I became a parent, then all of a sudden I became very interested in how to help other parents. And I realized I had a very specialized amount of knowledge that most parents didn't have. And it's weird being an educator for a long time and then you're a mom. And then you have this aha moment when you realize, like, oh, this is what parents are talking about, because you do get treated differently. And even when, as an educated person, and as an educator myself, I've been, treated, my kids have experienced racism in schools. They've experienced, the kind of disrespect that sometimes our system treats, just parents with in general, let alone parents of color. So those two roles, I think, have deeply informed my work. And I will say, being a school board commissioner, as challenging as it was, specifically last year, it taught me, I want to understand, why is this the way it is? Why can't we fix it? Public education has supposedly always been a problem. Why can't we fix it? I feel like it really gave me a sense of awareness that you just don't get unless you're on the inside. And, politics also, understanding how politics works, definitely, it's not about, unfortunately, our society isn't built on educating kids or supporting kids. A lot of times we use education as a political tool. And so, and then people have a lot of different expectations of what public education is supposed to provide, right? We have a lot of different goals for public education or needs from public education. And so, anyway, I finally have I've been almost everything but a superintendent or a principal at this point. And so, but I've worked a lot closely with those folks, and I have the deepest respect for them. I have to say, right now, it's like one of the hardest times to be a school leader, because of all these pressures on our, there's so many eyes right now on public education, and so many people that are waging battles using public schools, and some of them are very real, dealing with public education, and some of them have nothing to do with public education, but they're using public education as a rallying point or as a kind of a battlefield.
And staying on this
Mhm.
topic, um, of these important life lessons because, you know, a lot of the lessons that we take in, are from school, from families. But right now, I actually want to switch lanes a little bit and
Mhm.
talk about one of the biggest life lessons that you've learned, which actually happened outside the classroom. And I'm specifically referring to you surviving cancer not once
Yeah.
but twice. Obviously, you don't have to go too much into detail if you don't want. But I'd love to know, like, what did you learn about yourself or life when it happened in your 20s and in your 40s?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because you say it's like you're kind of switching directions, but the reason that I went into teaching was because I had suffered at 24. I got um, diagnosed with terminal spinal tumor, and I think the good prognosis would be that I might be paralyzed from the waist down. The bad prognosis would be that I wouldn't live very long. And so, for about 2 years of my life in my mid 20s, I was just kind of waiting for the end. And so when I realized that that wasn't going to happen and that I was lucky, I had several spinal surgeries. I realized I just it, you get this, and not everybody has this, but for me, I just felt like I want my life to have meaning, and I don't even, you know, maybe some of the loftier ideas that I had when I was younger. I just want to have a meaningful life and I want to be a good person. And for me, teaching is something. I was a tutor when I was like in first grade. I mean, I've always I started babysitting when I was 11. I've always been that responsible kid that liked, helping out with my friends' little brothers and sisters, even though they were like, they're annoying. And I was like, oh, I like little kids. And so for me, working with young people has always been something that just something that I love. So it was a no-brainer for me to take my acting training or and kind of some of the creative training that I had and put that into public education. Um, when I um, when I got cancer again, I was a parent, and that was very different because then you're responsible for kids, and my children were young. My daughters were 8 at the time, and then you really learn how to adult because when my 20s I could be really depressed one day or sleep all day or whatever, and however I felt I could deal with the very real feelings of just overwhelm. But when you're a parent, you can't do that, and you have to really learn how to compartmentalize your pain in a way. Because if I was very expressive, and I'm a very expressive person, that would make my kids worry. And so um, I learned to kind of soldier through. I think the first time I learned I could survive anything alone because I didn't have any support system. The second time I had the support system, so it actually made me feel very lucky that I had created this whole community of love around me and my family, something I never thought I'd have. But then you know, I had to learn how to adult in a sense, like, with children. And at the same time, I had parents, my dad had Alzheimer's. So I was, if for those people who might be watching, there's a generation where you're they call it the sandwich generation. You're taking care of children and you may also be taking care of your parents. And it's like, you feel like you're holding the world up. And um, I think, last year, during the recall, me and President Gabriela Lopez, we were targeted by hate speech. My family was attacked. My husband was targeted. My kids were talked about on social media. Um, I've been verbally assaulted in public. Like, it's been very scary. And at the same time, I think there were times when I just said, I was questioning, like, is this worse than cancer? There's times I thought, it's pretty similar, but I survived chemo and made it, and and so I think it's not anything I would wish on anyone, but it did teach me that life can really, like, for people that are suffering right now. I've heard stories of folks, who have long COVID, or just life is not working out the way we want it to right now with COVID. People have made plans to have destination weddings. Like, you can't do that. Or, me and my husband celebrated our 50th birthdays, and we didn't, you might have wanted to had a big party, but no, like there's a lot of grief that we're experiencing, even if we haven't lost loved ones. And I think those experiences have taught me that life, even if when it sucks, is a gift. And there are things that you can appreciate. And no matter what, like, I think life is about just sticking around as long as you can, and just, so even when things suck, you just keep moving forward. And I'm amazed. I literally did not think I would live to my 30s. And then I never thought I would have kids. Um, my kids are now in high school. They might be graduating, in a year and a half, like, and being on the school board, those are things I never would have imagined for myself. And so I just remind myself, you never know, bad things happen that you don't expect, but good things do too. And you just need to stick around long enough to get through the bad things.
Wow. And I wanted to hone in on that part that you said earlier about coming to this point where you're questioning if, being targeted by all these people, if that was worse than cancer. And I know this is again a really difficult subject, and again, I want to thank you for sharing, because when we first met and I heard about, oh, okay, you have these issues with trolls, and I thought it was just sort of this run of the mill, like, well, it's just internet's the internet. And then I remember looking at your page, and I was like, wow, okay, this is like
Yeah.
you're getting like it constantly. And then when I found out that, as you're saying, your kids are getting targeted, your husband, where you live, is being, you're being doxxed.
Mhm.
And I think a lot of people don't always think about the psychological, the mental impact of being targeted. I mean, people think that it's just online, but again, you were being targeted also in person. So,
Mhm.
how would you sort of describe that experience from both the emotional and psychological part of it, but also like the logistical part? Like, were there things that you had to
Right.
change, and things that your family had to change because of this giant target on your back?
Well, I think it's a good question, and I think we need to talk more about it because um, there's a lot of hate right now, and people are getting targeted. It's not just me, obviously. Journalists are getting targeted. Anybody who's covering the alt-right, right? You become a target, and it is American-born terrorism is what it is. And terrorism, I mean, the purpose of it is to shut people down, and also, to hurt people. Um, and we're not good at dealing with it as a country, and especially for certain groups of people. If you're a woman of color, if you're trans, we're all under attack right now. Um, and so what immediately it did for me and Gabriella, we've talked about this, is um, basically folks are launching information attacks, and those aren't new, right? You think of COINTELPRO and, like, the Black Panther Party. It's not like smear campaigns have never happened before, but they're happening in a way that's just kind of on steroids, with the ability, with online, you can manufacture people, right? They're not even real. You can do a GAN image that's like a made up person. You make up a sock puppet account pretending to be something. You can do, there's troll farms. All the stuff I've learned about last year that I didn't know about is an extension of this Gamergate culture, where if you want to target somebody online, you can, like, it's like the Matrix, where I don't know which episode, but there was the one where, like, Neo was fighting, I can't remember his name, the
Agent
guy,
Smith?
all of a sudden there was like 100 of them that he
Yeah.
was fighting, right? It's like, that's like online. That is like what it's like on Twitter. And that's what happened to me and Gabriella, where, I mean, there are people who didn't like me. I was like, okay, fine, we don't agree. Um, they say mean things at board meetings, and there was maybe 10 of them in San Francisco. Um, all of a sudden we were being targeted, and it was like nonstop. And then it was people who commented or liked what I was saying, they were getting doxxed. And they're just like a parent, that's on the PTA at a local school. And then they were saying, I had one person who asked me to take down their comment on a Facebook post because their boss called them into a meeting and said, I heard you were supporting a racist. It's just like, so it wasn't just me that was getting targeted. The student delegate was getting targeted. Her mother was, I guess her business was being targeted. And then I think a few months in, so Gabrielle and I both just kind of shut down. We just like stopped engaging because it wasn't safe at all. It was like duck and cover kind of thing. And then, we started realizing that in a way, I mean, that's what we do. I mean, we're very transparent people. We ran because we're connected to the community and we wanted to provide access and a seat at the table. And so the way that we communicate, like Gabriella was very active on Instagram. She was really good on there and she would ask questions and the community would respond and, via DM and things, there was this engagement and we just stopped talking. And so all of a sudden I stopped talking to the people that I normally share information with and I was cut off. And also that's a support network for me. Black Twitter and like Edu Twitter is a place where I get support. When I feel like, when I'm in a really white space, like sometimes I go back east and visit my husband's family in Boston and everyone's really nice, but it's very white, it's, and I'm like, I need some Black people. I go online and there's like, I get all my Black stuff, and I'm happy. And I feel like that's what we do, that's how we survive. I think a lot of us online is we can find our community, even if it's not where we live, we can find them. There's an online space that maybe and you've done that, I think, really well. You've created these spaces where we can, maybe you don't have it locally, but you can have it, and I was cut off from that at a time when I most needed support. I didn't have it because it wasn't safe. And then it also wasn't safe for the people that I was connected to. I started worrying that if I retweeted a friend of mine who's an Asian American, educator, who's like an anti-racist educator, if I retweet them, they were getting harassed and targeted by the same people it's so crazy, by the same people who are saying that I was anti-Asian. They were most likely to target Asian American colleagues of mine online because it's like, you can't like her, and we're going to blow everything up. And then I started realizing that some of the people that were retweeting me were actually like national people. These aren't just local crackpot people. There are some national alt-right people that were retweeting me. And so then, people, I think, not even from San Francisco, but that follow this kind of stuff started reaching out and saying, hey, we're noticing some really weird activity on your Twitter account. It's not organic. Like we look at the retweets and there's ways you can analyze it because it's all open source. This is like a targeted campaign. And I know that it's been happening with Chesa Boudin. There's a recall for him. He's a district attorney in San Francisco. It's just some of the same kind of crazy energy, or it's like this automatic, these people aren't here to engage. They're here to shut things down and to kind of cyberbully. And I've also seen the similar activity is in Fairfax County. It's Fairfax County, Virginia. There's pockets, and then SoCal, there's some pockets, people started sharing, yeah, we're seeing like this weird activity with some of these accounts. And so what's really scary is that like some of the people that were retweeting, they're alt-right influencers. And for people who don't know, in a way, it's like they'll put your stuff on 4chan or Kiwi Farms or some of these places. The purpose of it is to have somebody in real life hurt you. So it's if people, that say, oh, it's just sticks and stones, like when you dehumanize somebody on a regular basis, you're basically communicating to folks that are not stable that it's okay to kind of enact whatever kind of violent fantasy you have. That's a good target. And when you think about history, and this is why I think it's been this is the most sad thing is just, after I got attacked, information attacked, whether you agree or disagree with my viewpoints, I don't talk about other people. I don't talk about, individuals. I talk about policies. But when you like over and over, just disparage somebody, and like I said, even like Trump, like I didn't like him, but just to over and over do that, you're basically, like I said, you're making it safe in a way for people to cause physical harm. And so that is what has happened to me is in the supermarket. Some guy, he cussed me out in front of my daughter. I don't even know him. Like, you don't have to like me, but I was driving and somebody like literally kind of cornered me in his car, right? And so this is like unsafe physical behavior. And the people that have retweeted my account are associated with shootings in Washington. They're associated with alt-right accounts that are associated with insurrectionists and people who show up, at people's houses, like, or beat up journalists. And so that has been very scary. And I have kids too. So, I've been very vocal about them when I was starting to blog, because I was a mom blogger. I talk about my kids and like what I make for lunch and where they go to school. And then all of a sudden I'm like, holy shit, do I have to go through and like, I've been online for a really long time and I'm very open. I think like you, like that's kind of, I believe in transparent. That's my husband's very private, that's him. But for me, it's like, I'm a talker. I like sharing my experience and modeling that and like learning from other people. And then I think, God, I've made my family vulnerable. And well, I didn't do it, but other people have. And there are people actively talking about where my kids go to school on purpose, right? And I put pictures of them up online. And so that becomes in my husband's business. Like he doesn't have anything to do with the school board or my views on social media, and or my friends, right, who've retweeted me or don't like the recall, and they are getting targeted. Their kids are getting targeted. I have one friend, her child is trans, and these recallers keep talking about where her kid goes to school, and then it's on a thread with all these people saying anti-trans stuff. And it's like, how do I know some kook isn't going to come out of the woodwork and like target their kid, like that's messed up. And what's been, I think, really, disheartening is maybe you would expect this kind of behavior in the South. And that is a stereotype, I want to say, but it's happening in San Francisco and nobody seems to care. Like if they're targeting me, if they're targeting even a white mom who's against the recall, like nobody seems to care that we have some serious like alt-right. We have Trumpers in San Francisco, and we have people from outside of San Francisco who are like associated with real violence. And the Chronicle's not interested in it. The Examiner's not interested in it. Like nobody cares. Like they don't care. They, what they care about is that there's a mom who's angry that her kid had to do Zoom school, and yeah, that's a valid experience and that should be covered in the news. But to cover that and then not to cover the fact that like Gabriela Lopez, she literally, like daily, we get emails that say, fucking nigger, go back to Africa or whatever. And she gets emails that are, because she's younger, she gets emails that are like, you should be raped and decapitated. Like literally, those are the emails she gets. It's not healthy for anyone to get those types of emails. I know that my male colleagues are also getting some angry emails, but they're not getting any amount of that number. And as I said, it's not just about me. Like we have students who serve on our school board as student representatives, and they are vulnerable because companies like Twitter and Facebook and, I guess Instagram, have really lax safety rules. And a lot of times those safety rules end up targeting people of color. Like I got flagged for talking about race, but all the people who are, naming themselves after roof Koreans, which is like, I guess a euphemism for shooting Black people, like that's fine. The N-word is all over the internet, but if you're a Black person and you use it, like your account gets flagged. So, it just, I think it's really, it's made me more emboldened in a way to keep speaking because I think I don't want people to shut me down. And at the same time, it's also made me feel a lot less safe in the world.
And I wanted to talk real quick about the sort of root of where a lot of this shit's coming from, because I remember when we talked about it on the live stream, We brought up some of the people who were organizing the recall and how they're, on Glenn Beck's show. And I was like, what the
Yeah.
fuck are these people doing on Glenn Beck's
I was
show?
amazed. I have to say, you educated me. I was like, what's going on with the recall? I was like, I didn't even think of doing this research. Like, what the?
Yeah, and I mean, when I stumbled across it, I was pretty mind blown. But I remember when I started learning about your story and learning about all of the other things that were sort of surrounding and propping these things up. I mean, there are so many elements at play, but I mean, if this is possible to sort of briefly summarize,
Uh-huh.
um, like what is the bird's eye view of like what the fuck is going on? Like what is the connection
I can
between
totally
school
tell you.
boards and
I-
and
I-
and
It's
all this stuff?
it's okay. So I don't think any of this would have happened if it wasn't for the pandemic, and I think that's a national thing, right? Everybody's felt destabilized. Schooling was disrupted. And then you have basically, I think at the beginning, just like remember with the nurses, everyone was like, yay, nurses. And then now nobody cares, right? They're still struggling. People are dying. They're overworked. We don't care anymore. Just get back to normal, right? And similar happened with schooling. In the beginning, everyone was like, yay, teachers, we're cool, staying home. And then after the summer, there was a lot of parents who were like, okay, I can't handle this anymore. I need my kids to go back. And there were definite gaps between because our school system is so segregated, I guess, or right. You have some schools and school districts can afford to open safely, others couldn't. So private schools might have been open and public schools not.
Mhm.
And then you had groups of people that felt safer going back and people who didn't. And a lot of those broke down by mostly by income. Excuse me. So you have affluent families generally, I mean, let's just say it, and white families who were more likely to want to go back. And then you had low income and a lot of times immigrant families that live in multi-generational households didn't want to get their grandparents sick. They're the ones who they were less comfortable going back. And so you have this dynamic of parents organizing to open schools. And in urban cities like New York and San Francisco, you had a lot of tension around, what we should do. In addition to that, you have a national movement. The Republican Party basically decided to rebrand itself as the party of parents, and they were going to use this kind of parent frustration and energy. And even Trump said he wanted to be the party of suburban moms, white moms. But in addition to also people that are fearful of change and are mad that we're doing Black Lives Matter, and they were kind of pissed off that we took police out of schools and we're teaching about like that it's okay to be gay, like they're mad about that and they want to and so I think you've got 1 year after George Floyd, a lot of it, school districts were like, we're going to actually finally rename this awful school that's named after um a civil war, you know, traitor hero, right? And so kind of, I think, they capitalized on that parent frustration. And I think they also coined this kind of anti-CRT, kind of made it into a boogeyman as a real strategy. It's not, doesn't have anything to do with what's being taught, but we don't care. We'll just tell everyone that they're teaching kids that you should hate white people. And so those two things, I think they're national, and already was an infrastructure that was in place. It's Koch funded. And if you follow, I in my research, I found a Professor Isaac Kamala. He started identifying a phenomenon where professors at the higher ed level were getting targeted. And there was this newspapers called Campus Reform, and a story would appear in a Campus Reform article, and then all of a sudden this professor would get bombarded with emails saying you should resign for saying this really egregious thing, and their bosses and everybody in the college, and there would be this pressure to just fire the person. And he realized this is a tactic, and what he calls it was an ecosystem. He called it it's like a right-wing media ecosystem that was created. And he started saying, that is basically now directed at the K-12 system, that the right wing has figured out that they can use that, and they can target school boards, and through school boards they can take over local control. Because I'm just, all I am is I'm an educator through and through, but a lot of people run for school boards so that they can run for higher office. And so if they can get if they can take over school boards, then in 4 years from now, those same folks will be running for higher office, and then eventually they'll be governors, and that's how you create change. And they're thinking about the long game. So you look now, and there's people like Charlie Kirk started Turning Point USA, and there's Azra Nomani is a right-wing media, like, I don't know what you call her. She's associated with troll farms, and she's a Trump supporter, and she started Parents Defending Education. And basically, as a parent, you can report a school for teaching CRT, or what they like to say, which is awful, is anything that's pro LGBTQ. They say it's like pornography or pedophilia, and then they teach you how to file public records requests, lawsuits, how to just run people out of town, and so you have all these organizations, and they're all kind of national, but this infrastructure is supporting, like an unprecedented number of recalls across the country. So in the past 4 years, there was maybe an average of 23 recalls a year. Last year, there was 84. That's a 265% increase. And so that doesn't happen just randomly. And so for San Francisco, you think about it, San Francisco is like the feather in your cap. If you're a Republican right-wing person and you want to, like, what's the worst city in the world, when it comes to progressive policies, it's going to be San Francisco. So I think you had a confluence of, you've got local parents who wanted schools open, maybe don't understand some of the, they don't understand, like, why don't you just open them? And, well, there's reasons why it's challenging. Some people don't understand, some people don't care. Then in addition to that, you have in San Francisco, some more conservative members of our community who are mad about schools' names being changed, mad about changes at one of our most elite high schools. So you have some of the kind of local versions of basically anti-CRT. They don't want to change. They like the status quo. And then, I don't think it would have gone anywhere. It would have been messy. But then you had basically just this influx of cash from billionaire and multimillionaire Republicans. And so normally in the last 4 years, all the school board candidates combined raised about $1 million. In this recall, they were able to raise $2 million just for the recall. And most of that money came from just like several really large donors. Like one of them gave $500,000, and he's Arthur Rock. He's a charter. He invests it all across the country. And you have David Sachs, who has raised money for DeSantis in San Francisco. He gave money for the California gubernatorial recall. William Oberndorf, he replaced Betsy DeVos in the American Federation for Children. When she was appointed, he took her place. So these are all folks that are pro-charter. And so I think the recallers, as you said, they were on the Glenn Beck show. They're obviously connected to the right-wing media, right? Glenn Beck isn't calling me to go on his show. I mean, he probably knows I wouldn't show up, but it's like, it's not a coincidence, right? And so you're kicking it off. You're going to go on your friend's show, right? And then they're like, oh no, we're progressive. It's like, no, you're not. Like, progressives don't go on the Glenn Beck show. And so there was definitely connected. And I guess, because of that, they could tap into like a huge amount of cash, as well as media access. I also want to highlight that. The San Francisco Chronicle was basically like a PR firm for the recall, and they were publishing articles about the recall before they even qualified for the ballot. And I do think that happens locally, where you have local media kind of serve, they, depending on who runs the, we had pretty balanced coverage in the Examiner, but then, the owners changed, and then it became very much like the Chronicle. So when the public doesn't get information, and then you have basically a misinformation campaign running on Twitter, and then you have people like me and Gabriella can't speak because we're scared, or our supporters stop talking because they're scared of getting targeted. I mean, it was a full court press. And it was definitely not organic, like at all. But it is in some way happening across the country. I think San Francisco became a test case for a lot of folks. And I think they're going to be using this playbook from now into November.
And so now that we have a better understanding of what's happening right now in our schools and our school boards, I'd like to finish off with a question about what we can expect on the horizon. Because, like you said, what happened in San Francisco is going to be used as a playbook, and it's definitely not going to be the last public school that will be targeted. And
Right.
given what we know about these connections between the
Right.
school board recalls, the Republican Party,
Mhm.
it's evident that again this is leading to something
Right.
massive. There is this long game. So, what do you predict will happen if we continue down this path towards recalling more educators and progressives? What do you expect down the line?
So I'll give you two quotes. So one of them is Chris Rufo. He's the guy that came up with the anti-CRT, basically messaging campaign. He said, it's time to clean house in America, remove the attorney general, lay siege to the universities, abolish teachers' unions, and overturn school boards, right? So they're telling us what they're going to do. They're not even shy about it. Right now, they're pretty proud of what they're doing. So they're trying to take over at the university level. They don't want teachers unions because labor, it's one of the largest ways that, one of the largest labor type of organizations is our teachers unions. And school boards obviously are pipelines to power. And so between now and November, I think there really is an extension. I talked to Dr. Walter Grayson, and he was saying that, he was drawing a connection to January 6th. There's an interest in kind of taking back our country. And then I've talked to Jesse Hagopian at it's an education project. He's supporting teachers who are being targeted by this anti-CRT legislation. And he was saying this is exactly like McCarthyism. And I didn't know that, but he was saying that it's like in the McCarthy era, they basically, like almost with pitchforks, maybe with pitchforks, they went to town to the school boards and said, we should be fired because you're a communist. Don't teach my kids. So this is a playbook that we can count on between now and November. And the goal is to take over local political control and then kind of move up the line, right, from into higher and higher office. And also to purge our whole entire education system, not just K-12, but even at the university level, of anybody who's leading work in racial justice, right? All the progress, they want to go back to the 40s and the 50s. At the same time, there's a lot of people who are fighting that. And I know that, hope is important because hopefulness, or a lack of hopelessness is associated with depression and apathy. And so I think the goal is to just overwhelm us and make us kind of give up. Or there's so much disinformation, we're just confused. And so the goal is we need to get educated about this playbook. We need to stop seeing these things as individual events, right? There's differences individually, but this is a system. It's like individual racism. It's like, oh, well, no, it's a system. Racism is a system, right? And so we need to tackle it that way. And as a community, we need to talk about it, and we need to work in solidarity. So we need to stop talking, this idea that anything that's pro-Black is like anti-Asian. I'm hearing that narrative. That's totally messed up. We need to work in solidarity with one another. We need to support our LGBTQ and trans Like I'm not in that community. I need to do as much as I can to celebrate and support them, because there are communities right now that are really under attack, and that is one of them. But Sean Ginwright, he wrote Hope and Healing in Urban Education, and he's somebody that has written about how do you create healing learning spaces. He wrote, hopefulness is the function of agency, the belief that one can change things and pathways, opportunities to act to achieve a desired goal. And I know this from cancer too, right? Life is uncertain. There's so much we can't control. But if you feel like you don't have any agency, that's when we give up and we lose hope and we stop kind of working for that future that we're all, maybe isn't real, but we're all working towards that multiracial democracy where, everyone can feel valued and visible. And so we need to celebrate the folks who are doing the work. We need to continue to educate ourselves and stay engaged, and also take care of ourselves and each other, because it's not going to be a short fight. This isn't a one and done. I'm realizing, my husband and I used to have this debate. Like, he's like, why are you trying to do this? He's like, it's never going to get fixed. Like, racism is always going to be here. There's always going to be some problem with public schools, right? And I just told him, like, I'm just not giving up. Like, so we have to find our lane. Some folks are working on global warming. Other people are dealing with Ukraine. It's a lot. Find your lane, find the thing where you can contribute. And it is really important that we all stay engaged and contribute in whatever way that we can, to building that beloved community that Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. speaks about, and we're going to have to keep fighting. Unfortunately, we have to refight for, women's right or for a person's right to choose. If we have to keep refighting it, it sucks, but I'm not going to let them win. So I hope, people, it is overwhelming. And at the same time, okay, positive note too is I met you, right? There's a lot of people out there that are doing good work, and these are always opportunities for us to expand ourselves in ways that we wouldn't have otherwise. So it's not like with cancer, it's not something I ever would have wished would happen, but it happened, and I think I'm a different person, and I think, I'm a more resilient person, and I have skills I wouldn't have had if I hadn't gone through that. So I guess I just, if folks are, seeing all in the world, whether they're involved in education or not, there's just a lot right now to be upset about, but there's also like the spaces that you create. I see the conversations that happen, right? You're creating spaces for people to connect and work together to create change. And so I think that's a beautiful thing. And so that's what I'm committed to doing. And it does give me hope that there are so many people out there that feel the same way.
Wow, I'm glad that you talked about the importance of just the consistency of doing the work, and the fact that I've been writing and posting for way too long on Facebook, but it's and it hasn't always been a pleasant experience, but it's just one of those things where whether it's you know work advocating for social change, or whether it's taking out the trash, you don't have to like doing it, but you got to do it,
Mhm.
and it's just one of these things that you have to be able to uh, uh, maintain the consistency, and having this community is definitely really important for keeping that fire going. Ali, thank you so much for coming onto the show. Finally, you were always welcome back on Lag Radio to chat about public education, inclusion, basically whatever. But that is all the time that we have for today. But before we head out, what are you working on these days? And where can the Lag community find and support you?
Well, I'm really excited. I do think creating content is important based on all this misinformation. We have to do it ourselves. And so I'm starting a new podcast. It's called Just Talks. And I wanted folks to meet all the amazing people that I've been talking to, that I've referenced, that have been educating me about what's happening. So I'm talking to educators at the higher ed level, classroom teachers, activists, writers, and just about, how we can protect educators and education leaders who are fighting for education justice. So you can find me on Twitter at Allie M. Collins, and also on Facebook and Instagram at Allie Collins Productions, or on YouTube as well. That's where I'll be loading podcasts. And just really encourage folks to watch and share and support. If you can also support me as a patron, that would be great, because it helps me to produce more episodes so that I can get more out there, so that we can get more educated to take action.
Awesome. Well, Allie, again, thank you so much for coming on the show. All right, everybody, have a great weekend. Bye.